Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about disposal of animal bodies. I know this one's going to seem very morbid and sad, but this is something that I actually get asked about somewhat regularly, so I figured we should probably talk about it. It sort of goes hand in hand with the veterinary processes and what medications we have. That one came out recently. So I figured why not tackle it now? We're kind of in that mode already when it comes to the zoo and aquarium stuff. So let's talk about what we do with animals' bodies when they pass on. It is unfortunately inevitable. It does happen. Even in your best zoos and aquariums, sometimes we lose animals to old age, and sometimes it's to other animals. Like, there are things that happen, and sometimes you almost have to chalk it up to the circle of life. But in the end, we do end up on occasion with animals who have passed on, and what do we do now with their bodies? First off, we do try to be respectful. It's not quite the whole funeral procession or whatever that a human might have, but we try to be very cognizant of the optics of things and understanding that the staff and the volunteers and the guests at an organization that houses animals, they may have some thoughts and feelings about losing an animal, right? There are keepers who may have developed really close relationships with those animals, and so even when an animal has passed on, we're trying to be respectful in how we deal with that and how we handle the body so that we are mindful of the impact that it has on the people around us. Not to mention, there are certain animals who are very observant about that sort of thing. There are animals that take death of other animals very seriously, right? Elephants are one, crows and corvids actually are others that are very cognizant of what's going on and animals dying around them, especially same species and how all that works, right? So we also want to be respectful for that. For that reason, the animals may also react to how we deal with this. And so in general, when an animal dies, we try to be respectful of what's happening around us, around the animal, how we're getting the animal out, how we're getting them from point A to point B, and that sort of thing. So we're trying to be respectful and very aware of the fact that this is a delicate situation. Okay, first and foremost, once we have removed an animal from an exhibit, so that might require shifting animals off exhibit and away from the animal that has passed on and, distracting them elsewhere so we can safely get on exhibit to remove the body of the animal that has passed, or just getting tools to grab the animal out. I work in an aquarium. We work with fish. A lot of times you just need to get a net to grab the animal out. It seems very unceremonious, but that is what happens. Here's what doesn't happen. We do not flush anything down the toilet. I've legitimately had people ask me if we flush fish bodies down the toilet. Because I guess that's just how people tend to deal with dead fish at home, I guess. I don't know. I've never even considered doing that. But no, we don't do that. We get a net or whatever tools we need to get the animal out of the exhibit, and we take it in the back. And if we can, we'll have our vet take a look at it. In a zoo, a vet will definitely be looking at it. In an aquarium, when you deal with a lot of fish, there's not always a vet available to take a look at every death that happens because some fish only live for like 2 years. So deaths tend to be somewhat common, not because we don't know what we're doing, but because the actual lifespan of the animal is relatively short. So if we can, we will have a vet look at it. If we cannot, we will handle it ourselves. But either way, the animal is going to be examined before we dispose of anything, right? So what we're looking for when we're trying to examine what's going on, we want to see the history of the animal. So like, how old is it? How has it been showing any issues up until now? Is there any signs that we could have recognized in its behavior or its color or anything like that that would have tipped us off to something being wrong? Are there any signs of aggression or injury? Are there any signs of illness? That sort of thing. That's the very brief typical overview when we first are looking at an animal that has passed. We would like to find a reasoning for the death beyond it was just old, just because we want to be able to learn from that in case we need to look for the same type of situation for the other animals that we've got. Because we don't want to start losing a bunch of animals for the same reason because we were not observant enough to realize that something was wrong, right? I'll give you an example of many years ago, I took care of an exhibit that had sea snakes in it. These are very venomous animals. I had never worked with them before. They're really different than other types of snakes, other land snakes. But we were seeing them exhibit this same strange behavior, kind of a corkscrewing swimming pattern, and then they would just kind of tighten up and like look kind of, I don't know, I can't even explain what was happening. It almost looked like they were kind of cramping, almost like a tightening of muscles and then a loosening of muscles, like just repeatedly, and then eventually they would pass. And we investigated them and just tried to figure out what was going on. Like, okay, were they biting each other? They have lots of venom, so was this an issue of them biting each other and then they were neurologically suffering or having issues with that venom? We couldn't find bite marks anywhere. We couldn't find any evidence of the fact that these snakes might be biting each other, but we had to figure out what was going on. Eventually, we figured out that one of the snakes was kind of carrying a virus that sort of led to a kind of a leukemia sort of situation, and that's what was happening. And we never would have known. It took a lot of investigation to figure that out and a lot of analysis of the bodies of the animals that succumbed to this. Not every one of them did, but like when we saw these similar behaviors, it was very perplexing. But by using the bodies of the animals that had passed, we learned what was going on and were able to try and do some corrective action. And the only corrective action we had was to move the animal that we suspected was kind of the carrier of this virus from the rest of the population. And that was an easier solution that definitely fixed the problem until we eventually closed the exhibit and moved the animals elsewhere. We rehomed them. But we never would have known what was going on if we hadn't examined what was going on with these deaths that we had. And so when we remove an animal that has passed from an exhibit, usually the first thing that it goes through is a necropsy. So that is the animal version of an autopsy. So that means we generally are cutting them open, we're looking at their organs, we're taking samples and making sure that we're investigating the things that typically would affect these species of animals that we're dealing with, right? So for fish, we're looking at their gills, we're looking at their skin, we're looking at their eyes, and any abnormalities with their organs. So there are certain types of bacteria that can overwhelm a fish if they're already compromised for some reason. So we look for signs of that. We look for various other issues, worms or parasites that they might have that could also overwhelm them. In an aquarium situation, there's a higher chance that animals can get overwhelmed just due to load of parasites. These are all parasites that occur in the natural world, but in an aquarium, all the water is getting recycled upon itself, so these parasites can reproduce and overwhelm animals in a short period of time if it's not caught. So we're always looking for that, because if we have one death that is caused by a parasite, we treat immediately, because if we can identify what's going on and we can treat, we will save everybody that's left, right? So just letting it go and allowing those parasites to multiply and multiply and multiply is not a good idea. It's not an option, because we want what's best for our animals' welfare. We're going to treat for the parasite that we have observed. So we're always looking at the skin and the gills. They're the most common indicators of what's happening, and we try to take a look at those first. And the same goes for other species of animals in other institutions. We're looking for indications of what caused the death, and is it something that's going to affect other animals? Is this something that we need to look for in other animals? Are we going to have to treat? Are we going to have to just be vigilant for this, whatever kind of behavior that we've seen, or weird lumps or something? Sometimes it's Old age, sometimes it's something that is not contagious and that just an animal has because of like a genetic deformity or something like that, and it's not going to spread, but there is kind of a reason that that animal has passed that may not be just old age on its own, right? So we want to be aware of these things because then we can kind of file that away as experience for the keepers or curator staff and as a record in our record keeping systems of past issues that we've had so we can learn from them in the future. We also might bring it up with other institutions who have the same animals to let them know that, hey, this seems weird. This is an issue. So, like, an issue that some zoos have had to deal with is bird flu, for example. So, in the zoo, you probably won't see a ton of bird flu, but if there is contamination of, say, a food item with material that came from a bird that had bird flu, that could be a disaster for your bird population. For example, there is a zoo that has in the past had an issue with bird flu simply because they were offering insects raised on egg crate or egg containers. Like that's often a material that is used in the housing of like crickets and feeder insects, that the egg crate or the egg containers had egg material on them from chickens. And so basically the insects ended up having bird flu components on them that were ingested by the animals in the zoo, and then the animals started contracting bird flu, right? It's an accidental thing. No one thought that was ever going to happen. It was rectified, but that's an issue that was caught because an animal may have died of bird flu, and then they had to figure out where it was coming from, how that could possibly have happened, because they had essentially locked down their aviary to make sure that nothing was being introduced. There were no foreign animals in there, because that's a problem sometimes in zoos. You got birds and squirrels and things that are wandering around in areas that they shouldn't be, but in this case, this was a contained area that had been purposely restricted so that there would not be introduction of bird flu, because that can wipe out birds like nobody's business. It's very dangerous. And so then they found that the food that they were feeding was actually the introduction of the bird flu virus, right? It was not a great situation, but it was a really good learning opportunity, and it made sure that from that point forward, once they realized what was going on, they only used very clean materials to raise the feeder insects, right? They couldn't take a chance. But they figured that out through analysis of the animals that had passed. And they wouldn't have known what to look for, and who knows how many animals they would have lost if they had not been looking for the reasoning behind the death of the animal. So that is basically reason number one for doing a necropsy. And that's the first step in dealing with an animal that has passed. Well, I guess second step if you have to remove it from the exhibit first. But we try to necropsy all the animals to make sure that we understand why they died and we know what to look for for other animals' sake, that we keep our exhibits healthy, our animals doing well and in good welfare and not suffering due to conditions that we can control, So that is the first step. And so after that, that may be the end of the line. That may be all we need to know. If we have an animal that, say, died from old age, may have had some complications due to like liver disease or something like that, something that you could also attribute to declining health due to old age, there's usually a secondary something that ultimately takes that animal down. So we just want to know what we're looking at, right? And that helps us figure out what to look for in the future with other animals of the same species or in the same enclosure, that sort of thing. So that is often the end of the line. So that's all we do. And then it gets disposed of from there. In my facility, we tend to freeze the body until we can pass it along to our veterinarians, who will make sure that it is incinerated. If we're talking about an AZA institution here, those bodies will be incinerated. That is what happens. We do not feed animals who have passed on to other animals. That is not an approved method of disposing of bodies according to AZA, right? We don't we don't do that. So yes, generally we're incinerating bodies. Now, we may send bodies of animals that are rare to other institutions, vets, for example. We have a veterinary school here in the state where I live that is renowned for all of the vets and the experience that vet students can get while they're in school here. And that includes exotic animal medicine, which is a specialization. And so zoos and aquariums in the area can work with this veterinary school and send along animals that have passed on once, the institution has done what they need to do with the animal to make sure that they are aware of why it died and, what was going on. Can we prevent it with other animals, et cetera, et cetera. All that whole process that I just described. So once they have finished with that, and otherwise this animal would be incinerated, right? They could send this body to a veterinary school so that they can learn about the anatomy of the body. So it's kind of like when you donate your body as a human to science, it tends to go to a medical school or something like that to learn more about how the human body works and how, decomposition works, like all of that kind of stuff. And so we do the same thing in certain cases with the animal bodies because it's not that often that you get to have veterinary students learn about a giraffe while looking at a giraffe. You know what I mean? And understanding how crazy their necks are, long and strong, and how that actually functions. And so it's very possible that these institutions that have these animals and house these animals, if that animal was healthy and everything was good and, it maybe died of old age or whatever, the institution got what they needed as far as information about how the animal died and if they have to treat the other animals that they have, that kind of thing, they could send that giraffe, for example, to the veterinary school so that its students can learn about it. And then, of course, the institution that they sent it to, the vet school, whatever, will incinerate the body as expected for an AZA institution, right? They dispose of it properly. So that is also an option. Another option is sometimes when you've got a rare animal or a very, very beloved animal, it may actually be taken for taxidermy. And so that's not like the entire body, that's usually just like the skin or something, but it's very possible some institutions elect to have certain animals taxidermied, certain animals that are rare or certain really influential individuals, if they meant a lot to the institution or whatever, if that is kind of their deal and that's part of their education program, they might actually send the animal to be professionally taxidermied so that then the animal is still a part of the institution, still on display, and people can still take a good look at it up close and still learn from it. I will say that that's not as common in general, but it is a possibility, right? There are certain instances where an animal is not fully incinerated. They actually just take a part of it to use for taxidermy for educational purposes as an artifact that guests can learn from, and we will repurpose it that way. Definitely not common. More than likely, we're going to do the necropsy and that will be it. We may save some tissues for future use. One institution where I worked, we had an animal that passed on unexpectedly, and it was because of a rough reaction to an anesthetic because we were trying to do physicals with the animal. We did not realize at the time that she was pregnant, and that caused her to react very differently to the anesthetic. She did end up passing on because of that. We didn't know, and that was part of the physical. We needed to figure out what was going on. To be fair, there were no males of that species in the tank. This was a parthenogenic event, and you never know. So basically the female was pregnant without the genetic material from a male, and so we had no idea. We didn't know at the time that species could do that. And so it was an unfortunate situation, but at the same time it was really interesting. It was the first time that it had ever been documented, so we did save some of the tissues from the animals, both the pup and the mother, so that we could do a little bit more analysis on that, because that was a scientific breakthrough right there. That was really, really interesting First time that was documented in that species, and it changed the way that we conducted future operations because you never know. So at that point, we just kind of stopped using any kind of chemical anesthetic on those species of animals just because we wanted to play it safe and make sure that everybody got through it safely. So we just turned to other methods to anesthetize or handle the animals. It was a very interesting case. So yeah, sometimes we'll save some certain tissues from animals because it's a scientific anomaly maybe, or an interest case that could, maybe we don't have the ability to work with it right now, but if we say kept it frozen and in a safe place, like in the future as technology evolves, we may be able to find out more from it in the future, right? So we do that sometimes. If we're really kind of on the edge of a scientific breakthrough or something that's really fascinating from a scientific standpoint, we may save some tissues for that and just kind of hold on to them until we can make that scientific breakthrough later when technology is more on our side and more advanced for it. But generally, that's kind of the deal. We remove an animal from an exhibit. We try to handle it very calmly and respectfully because it was a living creature, right? We respect living creatures. We want them to have all the due respect that they need. We want to make sure that we're taking care of each other, our volunteers, our staff, our guests, as we all grieve. It happens, right? When we lose animals that we really cared about, we grieve. Keepers are no less affected by this. We have to kind of keep it together so that we can actually get through our day. But I assure you, keepers suffer because of this, right? We get to work with these animals. It's the coolest job ever. But then when an animal lives out its lifespan or it gets sick and there's not much we can do, like it's a really sad process, and it takes a lot out of people who are caring for these animals day in and day out. We build relationships with them. So understanding that animals pass away, we get that, but it is hard when it happens. And so we try to be very respectful when it does happen because we want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that people are grieving. It is a sad event. We're trying to do the best we can in getting that animal out of there and handling them honorably and, learning what we can given the circumstances. So then the animal will go into necropsy. We find out what we can. We take samples and just kind of try to protect the rest of the collection by making sure we understood exactly what happened with an animal's death. So that helps us know whether we need to treat for something. It helps us pinpoint the problem and see if, an enclosure needs to be, edited somehow or fixed or something like that. If there's a parasite that's in the mix that we need to get rid of, if there's something else going on that we need to pay attention to protect the rest of the animals that are left, we will do that. That's what the necropsy is for. We're investigating all up in there, trying to figure out what's going on. We'll take a look at the most common issues that the animal, whatever type it is, tends to face, and we'll look into common things that tend to happen to various different types of animals. Cats sometimes have kidney issues and bladder problems, right? And oddly enough, certain types of sharks also have kidney problems that ends up leading to their demise a lot of the time. And certain fish have eye problems that leads to their demise. So it's a lot. And we need to kind of have an understanding of the species that we're looking at and what normally affects them as far as their age or just common ailments that they might develop over time. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of zoo and aquarium animals live the good life, and sometimes it's got something to do with being overweight. So we try to keep that to a minimum where we can, but, they live a posh life. What can I say? But that's what we're looking for. When we're doing a necropsy, we're checking out, are there parasites involved? Was there bad health involved? An animal could have had a big tumor that they were masking from us. Like we had no idea that was there, but, after they have passed on, we suddenly see they had a giant tumor and were probably not super comfortable towards the end. And so that is an indicator to us that we either need to look into maybe what caused that, or making sure that we're keeping an eye on the other animals in that same exhibit or of the same species for similar kind of signs. And then, 2020 hindsight is really helpful for that. So, if you saw an animal that, say, looked a little off or just was slightly decreased in appetite and things like that, all those teeny tiny little signs that you might have recognized as signs after the fact now come to light, and now you have kind of a playbook for other animals that are in the same enclosure or perhaps are the same species, that if you see a change in this aspect, that's what that other animal did right before they passed, right? So then you're kind of more in tune to what you're seeing as a keeper anyway, and you will be more vigilant about seeing those signs in other animals and getting them to the vet, or having the vet come and take a look and getting testing done, because now you know what to look for because you literally saw it when you did the necropsy for this other animal. So now you can do maybe an ultrasound to see if maybe it's another similar type of tumor that you're seeing in this other animal that's starting to show signs similar to that one that you now recognize were the signs after it has passed that would have been too subtle for you to notice before. But now you're paying attention because you learned a thing. So that's what the point of all of this is. We don't just let animals die and then just let them, move on with our lives. Most of the time we're trying to learn what we can from them, seeing what they have to teach us so that we can take better care of animals in the future. And so the necropsy is a big part of that. And beyond that, there might be special occasions where animals' bodies are used for other purposes, typically educational, whether it's by veterinary students who are, learning exotic animal medicine and trying to figure out how an elephant works, what makes their anatomy so much different or similar to something else. And then, maybe taxidermy is another option as well, just because certain animals have such charisma or such a certain type of relationship with the institution that they were a part of, that it might be worth taxidermying an animal and bringing it back. And so, that's a rare case, but it's very possible that we could do a little bit more with that animal, and it could provide a lot more knowledge to visitors, to veterinarians, to keepers, to staff, to volunteers, in other ways beyond the span of its life. So I just want to set everyone's mind at ease. We do not flush animals down the toilet once they have passed, which is an odd thing that I think that people who deal with fish do. Not in AZA accredited zoos and aquariums, but I guess at home aquariums. I don't know. I've never flushed a fish. I don't know. But I do get asked about it on occasion, if we ever flush the fish when they have passed. And no, we do not. We do their necropsy. We may save some tissues and learn a little bit more about their anatomy or their history or some weird ailment that they have had. And then we try to use that knowledge to help us take better care of other animals in the future. So it's all meant to be making us better as an industry into the future, and providing better care and better welfare for more animals and more different types of animals, learning what we can when tragedy strikes, and trying to do better in the future. So it's not that we're not taking good care of animals, it's just that we might need to learn more about what we're seeing, the signs of an animal getting sick or something like that, whether we're dealing with a primary ailment or a secondary infection, for example. What are we looking at here? What can we expect? And so there are certain animals that we know very well. If you see this sign and that sign and that sign, your animals are getting old and this is an issue, and you're probably going to start losing some in the short-term window, right? Very soon. So we don't flush animals. We dispose of them properly. We try to handle all of that with respect because the animal deserves it, and so do the people around us. So if you have any questions about that or any other zoo or aquarium things and management and leadership stuff, just let me know. You can write it up in an email and send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget you can follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you're looking to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.